Political correctness has a civilizing effect on society. It limits the use of offensive terminology by replacing it with neutral euphemisms free of prejudice and negative connotations. It aims to reduce reflexive, offensive speech and promotes conscious thinking. However, saying that a person is uniquely abled or differently abled instead of simply disabled can arouse confusion. By suppressing information or altering it, the term actually encourages us to disregard those who need help, or even avoid a certain group of people, feeling we might use the wrong words or expression in our encounter. Political correctness strictly divides speech into two conflicting categories: proper polite terms and offensive slurs. That contrast then creates friction due to the ever-changing nature of politically correct terminology. One has to constantly be up to date with the latest semantic innovations or risk rejection by a community he or she supports, regardless of his or her intentions. But the debate over political correctness actually revolves around whether making semantic alterations to one's speech is even capable of solving pre-existing societal issues. Consider this quote by the commentator Jules Pfeiffer. "I used to think I was poor. Then they told me I wasn't poor, I was needy. They told me it was self-defeating to think of myself as needy. I was deprived. Then they told me underprivileged was overused. I was disadvantaged. I still don't have a dime, but I have a great vocabulary." This kind of arguments led some to view it more about censorship and intellectual bullying than it is about diminishing the social acceptability of using offensive language. Plus, continuously opting for circumlocutions can reveal a patronizing or holier-than-thou attitude, which is discriminating in itself. And imposing these terms can be taken as an attempt to dominate freedom of speech by favoring certain ideas over others. Previous US President George H.W. Bush made that connection in a 1991 speech at the University of Michigan.
The notion of political correctness, the movement arises from the laudable desire to sweep away the debris of racism and sexism and hatred. It replaces old prejudice with new ones. It declares certain topics off limits, certain expression off limits, even certain gestures off limits. What began as a crusade for civility has soured into a cause of conflict and even censorship.
Limiting one's freedom of speech in the name of greater good can seem condescending or straight up totalitarian. How can a single person or power decide which speech should be authorized and which one should be sanctioned, and on which basis? Contrary to popular belief, there is not a particular branch of speech that identifies as hate speech. Some forms of derogatory or disruptive discourse might be prohibited or punished, especially if they invite criminal behavior. However, freedom of speech gives one the liberty to say whatever he or she wants, with little to no regard to honesty, logic, emotional involvement, or bias. And that makes it a core tenet of democracy. It is also important to note that the non-conformance to political correctness is an outdated prerogative that was common at times where discrimination and oppression were taken with a grain of salt, and where minorities had no voice to begin with. So speech guidance should not be equated with dogmatism, but rather with a desire to show respect to minorities. We can take the Australian cartoonist Bill Leak as an example. Some of his work was described as homophobic, sexist, or racist, and he often ignited controversy by using freedom of speech as a protective shield against these detractors. He even said that criticism is an instrument with which to punish someone for having defied the unwritten rules of political correctness. What he failed to mention is that humor should not be used to dehumanize, marginalize, or alienate others. Trying to halt that process and holding someone accountable for his actions is also an obligation. PC culture does not have to represent a form of unattainable idealism, or a conceited, deliberate effort to misconstrue others just to feel intellectually superior to them. In most cases, it simply strives for inclusion and acceptance. But rest assured, in modern times, it's become almost trendy for people to publicly display how socially conscious they are. And here's where the word woke falls right into place. It describes someone aware of social issues and involved in the efforts to fight them. In the endless tug-of-war between the left and right, PC culture had been liberals' Achilles heel for years, but wokeness represented their newest consolation prize. It gave them incentive to call out injustice and discrimination whenever they saw fit, and gave them enough impetus to rally against it without receiving much backlash. So what are the origins of woke culture? The concept of staying metaphorically awake has been around for decades. It was used by G. Saunders Redding in 1942 in an article about labor unions, and by Martin Luther King Jr. in 1965 when he gave a commencement address called Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution at Oberlin College. Yet the first significant usage of the word was linked to a 1962 New York Times article written by William Melvin Kelly, who is an African-American novelist and a college professor. It was titled If You're Woke, You Dig It, and in it, he discussed black slang and its appropriation by white people. To put it into perspective, the word woke was used to warn African Americans about how their culture is continuously being hijacked by non-blacks. And in an ironic turn of events, that same word ended up being appropriated by that same group. Its meaning was watered down and universalized, stripped away from its black roots, and thrown to the general public to use and misuse as they saw fit, and with little knowledge of the word's historic origins. So in an almost satirical way, woke is used to describe those who outwardly showcase themselves as socially aware, when in reality they deeply lack self-awareness. Like systematic racism, appropriation of African culture is so common and trivialized that those who practice it fail to notice the role that they're actively playing in it, until they're faced with concrete historical evidence. Rock and roll, jazz, and hip-hop all suffered the same fate, and it seems that history is repeating itself once again. It can be argued that words evolve and develop different meanings with time. There is no gainsaying that woke has expanded to encompass all kinds of civil rights issues, beyond racial ones, such as sexual harassment and sexism at the dawn of the Me Too movement. But disregarding its origins can bring more harm than good, as it became a marketing ploy for brands to play lip service. Brand activism is a form of activism where corporations actively try to promote positive social, political, or environmental reform. What turns it into wokewashing is the intentions often hiding behind the progressive facade they display to the public. The money-grabbing capitalistic motives that use serious issues as a way to bait customers into believing that their products are ethically produced or that they're part of the solution. In 2019, the supermarket Co-op launched a gender-neutral gingerbread person to promote inclusion and diversity. Yet none of the proceeds went in support for those causes, nor did their hiring system make any particular change. There's also Burger King's campaign aimed at destigmatizing mental health issues, in which they released the Blue Burger. The move was deemed tone-deaf, due to the fact that most of the company's workers are underpaid and financial stress is one of the leading causes of depression. Hundreds of similar attempts have been made, including Gillette's ad calling out toxic masculinity, Pepsi's insensitive Black Lives Matter commercial, H&M's conscious collection that was labeled misleading and greenwashed. What makes these companies disingenuous is their intention. They're more about following current trends than they are about self-policing and social consciousness. Ever since clicktivism became a mainstream activity, the pre-existing borderlines between business and activism faded out, and staying quiet is no longer a viable option for brands, especially the ones with products targeted toward the millennial market. Which raises the question, does the motives really matter? That's a debatable subject. Even Hollywood grew accustomed to fading diversity in casting. John Boyega was cast in a major role in the Star Wars franchise, only for him to turn into a background character in the following films. He recently expressed his frustration with the move in an interview with GQ UK. What I would say to Disney, do not bring out black characters, market them to be much more important in the franchise than they are, and then have them pushed to the side. or let's not forget that celebrity imagine cover. If I can't forget it, nor can you.